Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here to talk about signs you are not an IP. And so this would be the INFP, ISFP, INTP, ISTP types.
And our first point that you are not an IP is that you have a natural talent and an ease with management or leadership. Typically with an introverted judging function as a driver, you're not going to necessarily want to be the one in charge. You have a strong respect for inner values and inner truth, and you also know that or believe that other people have the same. And so being in charge means that you have to tell people what to do. And for an IP type, that can sometimes be personally offensive. And so it's hard to put yourself in a position where you are the one being asked to ask other people what to do.
I do know some IPs in leadership too, and so they can take on that role. We're not discounting this type from leading in any sort of way. There are certain hesitations, like with FI dominant types, they might feel like you're taking away a person's individuality or their autonomy or their humanness, their soul, by ordering them to do things. It feels a little icky for some FI doms because it's like, well, what if they don't want to do that thing? That's inauthentic for them to do that thing. But I know some TI dominant types who are a little bit more okay with ordering people around, but they're typically in a casual mood until they have to do it. And so they're like, okay, this is something that we have to do. All right, then I'll take over this role too. So in general, IPs are not the first person to step into a leadership role, but they do have possible capability within them. And so the second sign is that you tend to take a group average approach when making decisions. And so IPs tend to dislike cookie cutter or umbrella approaches that overgeneralize people's experiences to make decisions. They don't like to speak for everyone else or other people. For an FI dom, they may not want to speak for everyone's feelings. They might be like, I know what I feel individually, and you might know what you feel individually, but I don't want to overgeneralize your emotional experience. They kind of experience what they feel individually, and you experience what you feel individually. They might project to try to understand your experience, but they're not going to jump to cookie cutter approaches.
Yes, the group average approach tends to be coming from the extroverted judgers. And so the extroverted judgers are going to much more naturally look to the group and decide either what's going to work well with all of the group here or what's going to feel best to everyone around us, rather than thinking about what feels right to me or what makes logical sense to me. And then how can we work together as a group? It's sort of a reverse of order. It's sort of group, then check in with the self, versus self, then check in with the group, in comparing the EJ versus IP types. And the third point is that your most natural focus is on the world around you. Now, this is not to say that IPs are not aware of the world around them, because they definitely can be. But being introverts, this tends to not be the most natural focus. First, they tend to be focused internally with thoughts, with feelings, and then the world around them is going to give them good information, but it's not necessarily going to be the natural focus.
Yeah, and so you'll meet some IPs, they need a push to engage with the outer world, which is true for all introverts.
Yes, and once they do get that push, whether they push themselves or whether they're pushed by someone around them, they can be some of the most spontaneous and some of the most in touch with the world around them. It just takes that extra push and that intention to move into the world around them.
So true, so true. And so the fourth sign is that you are at ease in many social situations because you naturally take other people's thoughts and feelings into account before your own. And so this is not to say that IPs don't take into account other people's thoughts and feelings, but you are the final authority to your own feelings or thoughts. And so you want to make up your mind apart from the group. When it comes to deciding on their values and what makes sense to them, they want to understand them in a vacuum apart from the group. And so they want to decide on what their stance is apart from what other people think or feel about it. And so they don't want to be contaminated by the group opinion when they're coming to decide on something, because it muddies things. It's noise that distracts them from their own inner voice. And so IPs want to be the final authority to what they value or what they think on a topic.
Yes, and I think it's also valid to say that with TE or FE being that inferior function, the group is the source of the most insecurity. So an IP knows themselves very well. There's a lot more insecurity and unsureness around the group. And the larger the group, the worse that can be. So trying to see the average of so many people in a larger group can, as you said, Joyce, muddy the water. And so it might start to make the IP question, which isn't always a bad thing for an IP. I think sometimes they welcome more input to further refine their values and refine their truth. But it's a source of frustration and insecurity at times as well.
Exactly. It's not to say that IPs aren't considerate. They can definitely be considerate, kind, nice people. We're just saying that when it comes to making decisions, there's that introverted judging versus extroverted judging push and pull.
And so that brings us to the fifth point, which is your biggest source of confidence is your ability to engage in the outer world. So similar to some of the other points we've made, this comes into play in that an IP is first an introvert. So the biggest source of confidence is really that inner world, understanding values, understanding the past, or understanding their future vision, not necessarily the moment or engaging outside of themselves. That's going to take energy to push themselves into that arena. And so it's not going to be the biggest source of confidence. It may be it can be a natural talent, but it's something that typically requires some intentional skill development to feel good in this area.
Yeah. So as an IP, you'll be sure of yourself and who you are or what you think about a topic, even if you haven't landed on a specific mark for that yet, because you just don't have enough information available to make up your mind. So you'll have a source of surety there. But you may not be as certain as to how other people may take you and take your identity or take your thoughts, because it might garner an adverse reaction. Because with inferior FE, people might react poorly to your harsh truths or your intellectual honesty. It might not be taken that well. It might be a very individualistic opinion. And so if your opinion is very different than the group, it might cause some tension. And for FI users, if the people around them have very different values, then they might be afraid of presenting themselves to the world too, or presenting their work to the world, because they're not sure how other people will react to it. And you might infer poorly into how people will react to it because your last function is an extroverted judging function. So you're not that confident in how people will take you. And so thanks everyone for watching. Thank you, Diane, for being such a brilliant mind to exchange with when creating these listicles. And so I appreciate you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.